Hey everybody, September 22nd, 2025 here with your after hours recap. So, few notable things today. Gold hits an all-time high. That is looking, really fantastic and just kind of continues. I don't know if we're getting kind of to the acceleration part of the move, but this was a really nice breakout, and then now you get some continuation from there. The gold miners, whether it's NEM or AU or CDE or HL, I mean, things are just acting really well on that front. That's awesome to see. And then silver is, again, the other metal, which is just absolutely rocketing higher. This thing looks, beautiful too. I wouldn't really try to time these tops. I think the underlyings are looking great. They're not very crowded longs in terms of cop positioning. So that's really nice. That continues to work well. The thing that is a little bit crowded in terms of cop positioning is Ethereum. And over the weekend, we saw this kind of ugly breakdown, which is why I said on Thursday when I was looking to buy IBIT, I was telling the guys in the room and the girls, if IBIT can't get going over $67 today, I would not be a buyer of it on Friday because then I won't have enough of a cushion to be able to hold it over the weekend. So on Thursday, you could see on Wednesday this thing puts in the after hours high. Thursday, this thing is struggling with that $67 level, just refuses to really break out. And then, Friday you get a little bit of a fade, and then over the weekend you get that gap down, which is exactly why I wanted it to push on Thursday, give me more cushion on Friday. That would allow me to hold over the weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't get involved, and, you kind of get a bit of an unwind. I think Bitcoin is starting to lag some of this move higher, right? If you kind of look at Bitcoin, this thing had topped, almost a month ago, actually more than a month ago, effectively. What is this? 814. So over a month ago, basically 5 weeks, this thing has now been lagging. The markets are at all-time highs, silver, gold at all-time highs, and the Russell effectively new all-time high recently. So that continues to act well. And meanwhile, just not a lot of love for Bitcoin. Recently, again, Ethereum over the weekend, not a lot of love as well. Not to say that this is for sure has topped, but basically hit its high a month ago and now just kind of lagging and incredibly crowded on the long side, if you look at cop positioning. So that's just something to kind of think about if this is the place you want to get involved. Just think about positioning. I personally thought that maybe a little undercut and rally of the 50 simple moving average would be viable, but I don't really see an Ethereum name that I could go ahead and get myself involved in. I don't really care for BMNR. ETHU is something that I would play over BMNR personally, but again, I probably will just end up leaving it alone. A few, again, the notable things today. NVDA came out and said that they would continue the washing and laundering around of money, tongue-in-cheek. They basically came out and said that they would invest $100 billion into OpenAI, and then OpenAI would then take that $100 billion and then invest it right back into NVIDIA. So both companies get the benefit of laundering money amongst each other. So that's awesome. We've kind of seen this script with CoreWeave. NVIDIA gives money to CoreWeave. CoreWeave buys NVIDIA chips. Again, just everybody's backs being scratched here. It's kind of comical. It honestly is very funny to see. I don't think it's illegal, but I think everybody can kind of see the fluffy nature of what the hell is going on in terms of these people just sitting in a room and kind of circle jerking around the exact same money. So it's, again, I don't really care. The bull market continues. It looks awesome. I thought over $178. NVIDIA looked pretty interesting today. Very, very tight setup, effectively against the 50. You had you tried to lose the 50 on 917. You had a follow-up gap on that, and effectively a higher low be built here. And very, very tight on Friday. Continuation today. That's all you could really ask for if you're a swing and position trader. Is just a low risk entry, and then the market's either going to stop you out for a small loss or it's going to reward you days down the road. So I thought today over 178 looked pretty good. I thought GEV today looked pretty good, and you can kind of see a handful of these stocks within this sector acting well. Again, a little shakeout on Friday, reclaim of the 50-day. Again, incredibly, incredibly tight. And then follow through today. Almost bought this thing at 630 today, but just left it alone. And then obviously with it, VST, new 52-week highs for this one. A little bit of an ugly close. Don't know exactly what's going on here in after hours. Would have to look at that news. But again, ultimately, a new 52-week closing high. I don't really know what the after hours news on this was. But yeah, that to me it looks fine. Tesla, one that I own and still an untrimmed position. It did go hit a new high of this entire move. A little bit of a sell-off in the middle of the day, but it got a little extended from the 50, about 8 times its average true range from the 50. So for some people, and usually myself included, that's kind of a let's de-risk the position, let's pay ourselves. But I'm just focused on the weekly chart here on Tesla. I'm really not looking to trim. In fact, this household will have a Tesla vehicle here pretty soon. So I'm trying to stay bullish. Trying to, kind of get myself into the mentality of this is a fresh weekly breakout. Be patient with it. If I end up giving up some gains, it's just the nature of the beast. I'm not going to nail the top. I don't want to nail the top. I want to end up selling it $100 lower than from what the eventual top might end up looking like after a blow-off move, which I don't think we've had on this name. So patience, I think, for now. If we start to really lose, prior day channels, the day before channels, losing the 10-day, stuff like that, do I de-risk, pay myself a little bit? Yeah, maybe. But for now, I'm just remaining patient. I mean, the chart is still above the 5-day. So there's no real reason for me to panic or freak out. You just kind of gotta let it work. We've obviously mentioned gold. In pre-market prep, we talked about it in the room today. Just absolutely beautiful trend, really nice breakout. It's not really crowded in terms of positioning. Hedge funds don't really own a ton of gold. So does this just keep grinding higher? It's like the interest rate cut. It's supposed to be good for stocks. It's supposed to be good for gold. It's supposed to be bad for the dollar. Kind of things that we've been hearing for a while, which I think is perfectly fine. We're starting to accelerate a little bit here, but it's just a fresh breakout after months and months and months of digestion, which is exactly how asset classes are supposed to work. They go up, they go sideways, they go up, they go sideways. You guys have probably heard me repeat that ad nauseum during pre-market prep. And again, ultimately, I think the market's acting well here. I still have my MSTR short. I was the beneficiary of a little bit of a gap down overnight. I'm still holding it untrimmed. Just for now, using kind of that 200 simple moving average as my stop. Another washout, taking out today's lows, getting down to that 320 level. Do I cover a small piece? I don't know. I don't really like MSTR to begin with, and I don't really like the way crypto is necessarily acting here. So we'll just kind of leave that as is. Nice to see AAOI get picked up off the 10-day today. This one I already own, so that's kind of nice to see this thing work. Oklo kind of continues its insane move. We did take out Friday's highs today. This thing is just a absolute monster. Don't really plan on doing much with it right now unless we kind of have some blow-off move. And at this point, the way it's just grinding, that blow-off move would probably be 160, 170 even. I could see how a 20-point move from here in a day is even possible, which is just kind of mind-blowing to say out loud. And then ARC still hanging in there really well. PDD I trimmed a little bit off on Friday and a little bit lower today. I still don't think this thing's doing anything wrong. Some digestion, let the 20 catch up, let the 50 catch up. I think we're fine there. And yeah, the market just continues to work. Apple continues to work. You've got a little bit of weakness today in like a Meta and Amazon, but with that move with Apple and Tesla and NVDA, I don't really see any reason to run for the exit doors. We've got earnings coming up, at least the start of earnings coming up, for Q4 in a couple of weeks. And, until then, does the market just digest a little bit? Does the market pull back 3, 4, 5%? Do we chop around for a little bit? We just kind of had this period of explosiveness within all these like mid and small cap, and even growthier kind of names, really some like pre-revenue names just kind of going ballistic, whether it's BE. And then we've got some of these other names like the memory storage names like your WDC, your STX, your SNDK. They're getting wildly extended, in particular SNDK. What happens when momentum really, even in like a name like Open Door today pulling back? What happens when momentum starts to wane a little bit? on some of those names, like what picks up the slack. I noticed home builders today were pretty weak if you looked at the XHB. So I don't necessarily know what to make about that. Do we lose the 50? Do we bounce at the 50 and then everything is back to good and normal on the home builders? I think that that's a possibility potentially for tomorrow. But there still are names out there that are acting well. There are still names that have nice bases within that kind of a growth space. We'll see if Rocket Lab can go ahead and start to move out of this base here pretty soon. I think it's done a nice job shaking people out, ultimately still holding the 50-day, so above the 50-day. You know, it's good to still be bullish on names like that. I think CLS, for instance, has a really nice high type flag. So, again, we'll just see. It was nice to see what NVIDIA did, you know, investing money in a company that will then in turn buy some of their chips. I think, you know, it's just brilliant kind of 2025 market for what we're in. And it just seems to be something that's working. It's like I hand you some money, you hand it back to me, and you know, we can both put that on our earnings report. So it's great. I'm still very bullish on the market. I don't see anything that's like leading me to say there's a bunch of failed breakouts, and that's the important part. There might be shakeouts, you know, and we can look at a name like Uber, for example, where there are a bunch of shakeouts, but ultimately, you know, it just still grinds higher, right? Everybody tries to buy this breakout, they get shaken out, and then it just grinds higher and bounces off the 50. So that's just kind of the environment we're in. And, you know, I'm just going to make a phone call to Eric Jackson and find out if he likes Uber, because if he likes Uber, then we're going much higher. Again, tongue in cheek, for anybody who didn't see BETR today, Eric Jackson totally pumped this one, and, you know, the stock went absolutely flying, halted, and then all of a sudden gaps up, you know, 100%. And I'm just like, what the, you know, like that's the environment we're in. So take advantage while the market's hot. The market is definitely still hot, but from my perspective, I did nothing today, and you know, my portfolio still went up. So that's always a nice environment. You try to get yourself invested using progressive exposure, and there are still nice bases out there. Spotify still looks pretty good. Netflix still looks pretty good, and Axon still looks pretty good, and so on and so forth. Just find the stocks that are hanging out best, that are in clean bases, and until those bases start to fail or breakout in an NVIDIA starts to fail, or you know, these growth names start to really pull back, and you can kind of gauge how that's waning on momentum, then we'll get more answers. But for now, you know, Apple's basically right up against a new all-time high. Am I going to be bearish while Apple's making an all-time high? You better believe hell no. Tesla's, you know, 40 points basically away from an all-time high. Am I going to be bearish while Tesla's this close to an all-time high? Absolutely not. NVIDIA, 52-week closing high. Am I going to be bearish while NVIDIA's making a 52-week high? No. So that's just kind of the mentality. And you have to continue to find setups to try and get yourself invested in. Again, I thought NVIDIA and GEV were both decent today. In fact, they were pretty good. They offered low-risk setups, which is the most important part. You know, it allows you to take a stab at it. If it works, you're getting paid a few days down the road. If it doesn't work, then you just take a tiny little loss and then you move on with your life. It falls into the category of I'm wrong 65% of the time. So, yeah, sorry for the long-winded kind of thoughts today. I thought today was pretty positive despite breath being poor for however many X days it's been going on. But yeah, that's just kind of my thinking here, and will probably continue to be my thinking. And until that changes or we see something materially change, I'm probably not coming off that stance, but something can materially change quickly, and then I will quickly pivot my thinking. So a bunch of longs open, one short open. I will probably try to locate a few more stocks that I think might be good on the short side. Food stocks definitely fit the bill for potential shorts, and we will just take it one day at a time. Hopefully you guys had an awesome Monday. I look forward to seeing you guys for pre-market prep or in the room at the open. Cheers.